Ever wondered why that craving for chocolate hits right before bed? Turns out this nightly comfort has roots that stretch back over 5,000 years, right to the rainforests where the Mayo-Chinchipe people first domesticated cacao pods about 5,300 years ago. The cacao tree, with its football-shaped fruit, wasn't just a snack. For ancient civilizations like the Mayans, it was something sacred. They used cacao in offerings, royal ceremonies, and even left traces of it on ceremonial pottery, hinting at a deep spiritual connection. Tonight, let your thoughts drift as we trace chocolate's journey from a bitter sacred brew to the sweet bar on your nightstand. From every challenge, its harsh taste, its strange rituals, came a solution that brought chocolate closer to what soothes us now. And it all starts with the first sip, in a world where chocolate tasted nothing like what you know today. For the Maya, cacao was more than a food. It was a sacred brew that shaped their rituals, beliefs, and even their social order. Imagine a thick, frothy drink, dark and spicy, with hints of chili and just enough bitterness to jolt you awake. The Maya achieved that signature foam by pouring the mixture back and forth between clay vessels, a technique that gave the drink its special texture and made it feel alive in their hands. This was not a casual refreshment. Cacao played a starring role in the most important moments of Mayan life: weddings, funerals, royal ceremonies. Kings sipped it from painted vessels surrounded by images of gods and jaguars. Warriors drank it before battle, hoping for strength. When someone died, they were buried with cacao pots to carry into the afterlife. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of theobromine, the chemical that gives chocolate its edge, in pottery dating back to around 3300 BCE in Ecuador, connecting the story of cacao all the way back to the Mayo-Chinchipe culture. Cacao wasn't just a drink. It was a symbol of status and a bridge to the divine. Mayan texts describe ceremonies where nobles would offer their own blood over cacao pods, a sacrifice to the gods. Myths say the god of maize gifted cacao to humans, making it both a privilege and a responsibility. The beans themselves were so valuable they served as offerings and sometimes as payment. One cacao bean could buy a tomato, 100 could get you a turkey. Cacao was included in dowries and used to seal social contracts, reinforcing its role in both spiritual and economic life. But don't picture something sweet or comforting. For the Maya, chocolate was medicine, a luxury, and a way to connect with the spirit world. The taste was bold, earthy, and nothing like the bars you find in a convenience store. Commoners rarely tasted pure cacao. They might have a watered-down version. But the real thing was reserved for the elite, kings, priests, and warriors. It was a drink of power, both literal and symbolic. Scientists have studied the lingering traces of cacao in ancient pottery. But the Maya didn't need chemical analysis to know they had something special. They felt its effects: alertness, energy, maybe even euphoria during their ceremonies. Cacao marked the passage from life to death, from ordinary to sacred, from commoner to king. The Maya set the stage, but they weren't the only ones who saw the magic and the value in cacao. Soon another civilization would take this sacred bean and turn it into something even more powerful. In the Aztec world, cacao beans were more than just a ritual drink. They were the backbone of everyday trade. Picture yourself at a bustling market in Tenochtitlan, the air thick with the scent of spices and the sound of bartering. Here, 10 cacao beans could buy you a rabbit, 100 might get you a turkey. Merchants kept careful count, and everyone knew the worth of a handful of beans. The city's tribute stores once held nearly 9.6 million beans, all collected as payment from conquered regions. Cacao was wealth you could hold in your palm. If you were among the elite, cacao wasn't just currency, it was a mark of status. The Emperor Montezuma II was famous for his devotion to chocolate, drinking up to 50 cups a day. These weren't sweet drinks, but cold, bitter, and spiced, served in golden goblets. Imagine the soft clink of those cups as you settle in tonight. For Montezuma, every sip was a show of power, each cup a reminder of how cacao touched every part of Aztec life. The Aztecs couldn't grow cacao in their high-altitude capital, so beans arrived from far-off lands as tribute. Porters hauled heavy baskets through the city, and special market stalls were dedicated to cacao traders. If you were lucky enough to handle these beans, you felt the weight of something precious, something that could buy food, pay taxes, or even settle a debt. But cacao's value ran deeper than economics. It was sacred, linked to the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, who, according to legend, gifted cacao to humanity. Priests used annatto to dye chocolate drinks red for ceremonies, blending the earthy taste with a sense of ritual and awe. Warriors drank cacao before battle, hoping for strength. New mothers sipped it to regain energy after childbirth. Even those with the least might save up for a single cup on a festival day. For most Aztecs, chocolate wasn't a comfort. It was sharp, earthy, and spiced, often thickened with cornmeal. They drank it cold, believing that heat would ruin its power. The flavor could be jarring, especially for outsiders. The Spanish, expecting gold, found an empire running on these small brown beans instead. When Cortés met Montezuma, he was offered chocolate in a golden cup, a gesture that spoke volumes about what the Aztecs valued. For them, cacao was more than food, more than money. It was a symbol of power, faith, and survival. But to the newcomers, this bitter, foamy drink was a puzzle. They saw its value, but the taste was a challenge. And as the old world met the new, the meaning of chocolate was about to change. When the Spanish first brought cacao beans back from the Americas, they expected something extraordinary. After all, they'd seen Montezuma drink cup after cup, treating it as a royal staple. But the reality? The first time Spanish sailors tried Aztec chocolatl, they nearly spat it out. One conquistador wrote that it was more a drink for pigs than humans. The bitterness was only the beginning. The drink was cold, gritty, and loaded with unfamiliar spices, flavors that clashed with every expectation. To a palate raised on sweet wine and honey, this was a shock. It wasn't just the taste. The Aztecs thickened their chocolate with cornmeal and served it cold, while the Spanish wanted something smooth and warm. The addition of flowers, chili peppers, and other spices only deepened the divide. For most Spaniards, chocolate was a curiosity at best, an ordeal at worst. Some religious figures even questioned its stimulating effects, unsure if something so strange belonged in polite society. At first, cacao was dismissed as a novelty, a drink for foreigners. The Spanish struggled to prepare it the way the Aztecs did, failing to create the prized foam and ending up with something greasy and unappealing. For years, cacao sat in storerooms and was sometimes used as ballast for ships, hardly the fate you'd expect for what would become a global obsession. But a few adventurous souls refused to give up. By the 1540s, Spanish nuns in Mexico began experimenting. They heated the bitter drink and blended in cane sugar and vanilla, keeping just enough of the original flavor to remind them of its origins, but transforming it into something new. This simple act, sweetening and warming the drink, was the turning point. Suddenly, chocolate wasn't just tolerable, it was interesting. It was something you might crave. Spanish nobles started to take notice, importing cacao as a curiosity and quietly sipping the new sweetened version behind closed doors. chocolate moved from being a medicine for stomach aches to a fashionable treat. The royal court began adding cinnamon and nutmeg, flavors they already loved. And soon, chocolate was being served hot in delicate porcelain cups, far removed from its gritty ceremonial roots. Still, chocolate's rise wasn't without controversy. Some priests debated whether drinking it broke fasting rules, since it was so filling. The debate dragged on until Pope Pius V declared in 1569 that chocolate didn't count as food, mainly because he found it so unpleasant. With that hurdle cleared, the drink spread quickly. By 1585, the first commercial shipment of cacao beans arrived in Seville, and Spanish chocolateros refined the process even more, grinding the beans finer and adding more sugar to smooth out the bitterness. You can picture it. Spanish colonists returning from Mexico, now hooked on their daily chocolate, demanding it sweet and hot in their own kitchens. Chocolate became a status symbol in Madrid, with wealthy families hiring chocolate makers and serving it in elaborate ceremonies. Spanish convents perfected the recipes, adding almonds, rosewater, and orange blossom, and sold their creations to fund their monasteries. The drink that had once repelled them was now a luxury. The irony is hard to miss. The Spanish tried to erase so much of Aztec culture, but they couldn't resist chocolate. They stripped away its ritual, its bitterness, and its original preparation. But the core idea remained. This bean could make something special, but one simple ingredient would change everything. If you were a Spaniard in the mid-1500s, you might have heard whispers about a new way to drink chocolate, one that didn't make you wince. The breakthrough came when Spanish nuns in Mexico started adding cane sugar to their chocolate in the 1540s. This wasn't just a small tweak. Sugar didn't just cover up the bitterness, it changed the drink entirely. Chocolate went from a gritty, medicinal brew to something you'd actually want to sip for pleasure. Suddenly, the Spanish elite were paying attention. By the late 1500s, even the King of Spain was getting barrels of powdered chocolate mixed with sugar shipped from Mexico. Sugar worked because it fit right in with European tastes. People were already sweetening their wine and tea. Add a little sugar to chocolate, and it's suddenly familiar, something you might serve at breakfast or to impress your guests. And they didn't stop there. Cinnamon and vanilla were quickly added to the mix, giving the drink a richer, more complex flavor. The Aztecs would have found this version almost unrecognizable. For them, chocolate was about ritual and purity. For the Spanish, it was about pleasure and status. But there was a catch. Sugar was expensive, so expensive that a single pound could cost us. As European colonies in the Caribbean ramped up sugar production in the 1600s, prices started to drop. More people could afford to sweeten their chocolate. By the mid-1600s, chocolate houses began popping up in London, where men gathered to drink chocolate and debate politics. The British added milk to make it creamier. The French whisked in eggs. Each country put its own spin on the recipe, but everyone agreed on one thing: chocolate needed to be sweet. Sugar didn't just change the flavor, it changed where and how chocolate was enjoyed. The Aztecs drank it cold in sacred ceremonies. The Spanish drank it hot at home. The English turned it into a social drink, something you'd order in a bustling coffee house. Chocolate became a way to show off, to gossip, or to get through a long church service. Some wealthy women had servants bring chocolate to them at home, while certain convents built special rooms for nuns to sip chocolate during lengthy prayers. Doctors joined the craze, prescribing chocolate as a cure for everything from fatigue to heartbreak. The more sugar they added, the more health benefits they claimed. By 1700, chocolate had become a sweet luxury, and demand was climbing fast. The Spanish tried to keep their cacao monopoly, but the Dutch and English soon found ways to get their own supplies. Prices dropped, and chocolate slowly moved from the tables of kings to the homes of the middle class. Sugar solved the bitterness, but a new challenge remained: how to carry chocolate beyond the cup. For centuries, chocolate was something you drank, not something you could hold. That changed in 1828 when a Dutch chemist named Conrad Johannes van Houten patented a machine that would quietly reshape the world of chocolate: the hydraulic press. With a heavy iron cylinder and a blast of pressure, Van Houten's invention squeezed roasted cocoa beans so intensely that nearly half their weight came out as clear yellow cocoa butter. What was left behind was a dry, compact cake, easy to grind into a fine powder. This new powder dissolved smoothly in water or milk. No more greasy clumps or gritty residue at the bottom of your cup. More importantly, the ability to extract cocoa butter meant you could finally play with chocolate's texture and form. The press made it possible to separate the two main parts of the cocoa bean, cocoa butter and cocoa solids, which opened up a new world of possibilities. Chocolate was no longer bound to the cup. Van Houten didn't stop there. He introduced a process called Dutching, where he treated the cocoa powder with alkaline salts. This step reduced acidity, smoothed out bitterness, and gave the powder a richer color. Suddenly, chocolate drinks weren't just easier to make, they were gentler on the tongue and looked more appealing. Dutching made chocolate more approachable and mixable, a little less wild than its ancient ancestors. The hydraulic press was a brute, capable of exerting 200 kilograms of pressure per square centimeter. Workers would load the beans, crank the machine, and listen to the slow, rhythmic churn. After a few minutes, there'd be a soft mechanical hum as the gears wound down and the work was done. The result? Chocolate that was lighter, drier, and far more versatile than anything that had come before. At first, Van Houten focused on selling better cocoa powder for drinking. He didn't realize he'd set the stage for the next leap forward. By removing so much cocoa butter, he made it possible for confectioners to recombine the fat and powder in new ratios. For the first time, chocolate could be molded into solid shapes. The powder also kept well in storage and held up on long journeys, making chocolate easier to ship and sell around the world. Factories across Europe rushed to adopt the new process. Industrial manufacturers could now produce standardized cocoa powder by the ton, dropping prices and making chocolate more accessible. In just a few decades, chocolate went from a rare luxury to something you might find in an ordinary home. The economics shifted too. Dutch and English companies seized control, and the old Spanish monopoly faded. Van Houten's press and his Dutching process spread quickly, especially since he patented the press, but not the alkalization step. Competitors copied the technique, tweaking the machinery just enough to avoid paying royalties. By the time Van Houten died in 1851, his name was everywhere. But the real fortune had slipped through his fingers. The real twist? Van Houten never set out to make solid chocolate. He just wanted a better drink. But by separating cocoa butter from powder, he made it possible for chocolate to escape the cup and take on new forms. The first attempts at solid chocolate were rough, coarse, and crumbly, nothing like the smooth bars you might expect. But for the first time you could break off a piece, let it melt on your tongue, or slip it into your pocket for later. As the press faded into the background, the stage was set. Someone was about to try turning this new powder and cocoa butter into something you could actually eat. And when the first chocolate bar appeared, nobody was quite sure what to make of it. Picture yourself in England, 1847. You walk into a shop and see something odd, a hard, dark slab labeled "Eating Chocolate." This is the first solid chocolate bar, made by J.S. Fry and Sons. It's a mix of cocoa powder, sugar, and cocoa butter, all pressed together thanks to Van Houten's new technology. Up to this point, chocolate was always something you drank, not something you bit into. So when Fry's new bar hit the shelves, people didn't quite know what to do with it. The reaction wasn't exactly enthusiastic. Most people were used to drinking their chocolate hot, sweet, and smooth. Now they were being asked to chew through something dense, bitter, and a little gritty. The bar crumbled easily and stuck to your teeth. Some thought it looked like medicine. Others tried to dissolve it in hot water, as if hoping it would turn back into the drink they knew. For a while, it seemed like the chocolate bar might flop before it even got started. Fry and Sons had to work hard to convince anyone to try this new invention. They called it eating chocolate to make it clear you weren't supposed to melt it down. But the market was slow to catch on. Chocolate houses, where the wealthy gathered to sip their drinks, wanted nothing to do with it. Grocers didn't see the point in stocking a product that, at first, barely moved off the shelves. The bars were sold in basic slabs with little packaging, and they sometimes stuck together in crates. Still, Fry's team kept pushing, certain they'd found a new way forward. What finally tipped the scales wasn't the taste, it was convenience. The bar form meant you could carry chocolate with you, no preparation needed. Miners, factory workers, and soldiers started to realize they could stash these calorie-dense bars in a pocket or a bag. No more waiting for water to boil or for a servant to bring a porcelain cup. The chocolate bar was practical, even if it wasn't perfect. Slowly, people started to see the benefit of having chocolate on the go, and sales began to rise. Fry and Sons leaned into this, shifting their advertisements to show travelers and workers unwrapping bars on train platforms or during breaks. They improved the molds to make the bars thinner and less crumbly, and over time, the product became more reliable. The idea of eating chocolate was no longer so strange. As the 1860s rolled in, people were less concerned about the gritty texture and more interested in the simple pleasure of breaking off a piece whenever they wanted. Then, in 1849, Cadbury entered the scene with their own version of the chocolate bar. Competition forced both companies to get creative, adding ingredients like nuts and dried fruit, and improving the recipes. They worked on better ways to wrap the bars and keep them from melting or sticking together. As production ramped up, prices dropped, and suddenly, chocolate became something you didn't have to be rich to enjoy. By the 1870s, the chocolate bar was everywhere. What started as an awkward, unfamiliar slab had become a symbol of everyday indulgence. You could eat it at work, hand it to a child, or stash it away for later. The ritual of chocolate had changed. No more fancy cups or drawn-out ceremonies. Now it was about the small, private pleasure of unwrapping a bar and breaking off a piece, just for you. Of course, the texture of these early bars was still far from perfect. They were gritty and uneven, more like a pressed cake than the silky chocolate we expect today. But all that was about to change, thanks to a mistake in a Swiss chocolate workshop that would set a new standard for what chocolate could be. In 1879, something unexpected happened in a small chocolate workshop in Switzerland. Rodolphe Lindt, a Swiss chocolatier, left his mixing machine running much longer than usual. Some say by accident, others by stubborn curiosity. When he checked on the batch the next day, he found chocolate that looked and felt completely different from anything before. Instead of the usual gritty, stubborn mass, the chocolate was glossy, soft and smooth. This was the birth of the conching process, named for the shell-shaped machine that did the work. Up until then, even the best chocolate bars were coarse, with tiny sugar crystals and cocoa particles that left a rough feeling on your tongue. Lindt's conch changed all that. It slowly ground the chocolate mixture, cocoa mass, sugar, and cocoa butter for hours or even days at a time. The machine's granite rollers moved back and forth, breaking down every last particle. The heat and air circulating through the chocolate helped bitter acids evaporate, while the long mixing time spread cocoa butter evenly throughout the batch. Suddenly, chocolate didn't just taste better, it melted in your mouth, leaving nothing behind but flavor. Lindt's first conch was a heated metal trough with a heavy roller, turned by hand for days on end. Imagine the ache in your arms as you crank a handle, the scent of chocolate growing richer and smoother with each hour. The process was so demanding and the results so remarkable that Lindt kept his method secret at first, refusing to sell conched chocolate to other candy makers. Competitors guessed he'd added something new, but really, it was just patience and motion. The difference was obvious. Non-conched chocolate was grainy and hit you with a blast of bitterness and sugar all at once. Conched chocolate unfolded slowly, with flavors that lingered and shifted: vanilla, roasted nuts, maybe even a hint of fruit. The smoothness made it feel richer as the cocoa butter coated your mouth evenly. People started describing chocolate as something that melted, a word that hadn't really applied before. Conching wasn't cheap or quick. It added days to the process and doubled the price of a bar. But Lindt's shop in Bern soon had people traveling from all over just to taste this new, silky chocolate. In 1881, Lindt patented his conching process, anchoring his place in chocolate history. Other makers tried to copy him, but until machines replaced hand cranks in the 1890s, few could match his results. The real magic of conching went beyond texture. The hours of mixing and aeration smoothed out harsh flavors and let unwanted acids escape. The chocolate's chemistry changed, balancing sweetness, bitterness, and aroma. Even modern scientists agree. Conching creates a more refined, balanced taste by letting flavors develop and blend. Today's industrial conches look nothing like Lindt's original, but the principle is the same. Time and motion turn rough ingredients into something that flows like silk. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel it. Warm chocolate pouring out in a glossy ribbon, ready to be shaped, filled, or simply broken into pieces. Pause for a second and picture that. Chocolate so smooth, it doesn't just taste good, it feels good. That moment when the bar snaps, then melts on your tongue. It's easy to take for granted now, but it all started with a single accidental batch in a Swiss workshop. And while Lindt's process set a new standard, it left one big question hanging in the air. What if you could make chocolate even more comforting? something that reminded you of childhood. In 1875, Daniel Peter stood in his workshop in Vevey, Switzerland, staring down another failed experiment. He was determined to solve a problem that had frustrated chocolate makers for years: how to blend milk into chocolate without ending up with something that spoiled or tasted off. Fresh milk turned chocolate watery and quick to mold. Boiling it led to curdling and a strange aftertaste. Most people gave up. Peter kept going. The real breakthrough came when Peter teamed up with his neighbor, Henri Nestlé. Nestlé had just perfected a powdered condensed milk for infant formula, a shelf-stable ingredient that wouldn't spoil. Peter decided to try mixing this dried milk with chocolate. The first attempts were gritty and awkward, but he kept tweaking the formula, adjusting the ratio of milk powder to cocoa, and working on the texture. After months of trial and error, he landed on a blend of about 30% milk solids to 70% chocolate. He named the result Gala Peter, borrowing the Greek word for milk. Even then, the mixture wanted to stay crumbly. Peter realized he needed more cocoa butter to get the creamy texture he wanted. But cocoa butter was expensive. Lindt's conching process came to the rescue. Long, slow mixing helped the milk blend evenly into the chocolate, smoothing out the lumps and giving the bar a soft, even texture. It took 2 more years of adjustments before Peter finally produced a bar that was creamy, sweet, and could sit on a shelf without spoiling. At first, traditional chocolatiers scoffed. They called milk chocolate baby food and dismissed it as a fad for people who couldn't handle real chocolate's bitterness. But children loved it from the start. The lighter color and gentle taste appealed to young palates. Parents liked that it had nourishing milk, and soon milk chocolate bars started showing up in lunch pails and after-school snacks. By 1880, Peter was turning out more than 1,000 kilos of milk chocolate every year. Nestlé saw the opportunity and by 1904 began producing Peter's formula on a bigger scale. They improved the process with roller mills, grinding the milk powder even finer for a smoother bite. Around the same time, sugar prices dropped, making milk chocolate affordable for more families. Suddenly, chocolate wasn't just for the wealthy. It was something you could hand to a child at the end of the school day. The science behind milk chocolate was simple but effective. Condensed milk powder prevented spoilage and kept the bars shelf-stable. Milk proteins naturally soften cocoa's bitterness, so less sugar was needed. Most importantly, milk fat helped the chocolate melt smoothly at body temperature, creating that creamy mouthfeel that made milk chocolate so appealing. Factories adapted quickly, running special concays at lower temperatures to protect the milk solids, and wrapping bars in foil-lined paper to keep them fresh. By the start of World War I, milk chocolate had overtaken dark chocolate in sales across much of Europe. Today, it accounts for over 80% of global chocolate sales, a childhood staple, and the version most people think of when they picture a chocolate bar. Milk chocolate solved the next problem: bitterness met with cream. But mass production needed another leap. Factories, once reserved for the wealthy, were suddenly churning out chocolate for everyone. The early 1900s marked a turning point. Chocolate shifted from an indulgence for the privileged to a treat you could find in a worker's lunch pail or a child's school bag. This wasn't just a change in taste, it was a change in society itself. The Industrial Revolution didn't just speed up chocolate making, it changed who could enjoy it and how often. Milton Hershey, a former caramel maker from Pennsylvania, saw the future at the 1893 World's Fair. He watched German chocolate-making machines crank out hundreds of pounds of cocoa an hour and bought the entire setup on the spot. Back home, his engineers reworked the machines for milk chocolate, and soon the Hershey factory was running like a precision clock. Every step, roasting, mixing, conching, was standardized. Milk arrived pre-mixed to the right fat content. By 1905, Hershey was making over 100,000 bars a day. A bar that once took nearly a week to produce could now be finished in just 4 hours. Suddenly, chocolate cost just a few cents, and you didn't need to be rich to get your hands on it. Cadbury in Britain wasn't far behind. Their Bournville factory, opened in 1879, became a model of industrial efficiency. Conveyor belts and specialized teams kept chocolate moving from roasting to molding without pause. The assembly line hum was constant, and output soared. Cadbury's products, once aimed at the upper class, now filled train cars bound for grocery stores all over the country. Machines took over the heavy work. Giant rotary conches smoothed out chocolate in bulk. Hydraulic presses stamped out rows of bars, and enrobers dipped candies at a rate no human could match. The result? Bars that looked and tasted the same no matter where you bought them. Consistency replaced the old world's small-batch charm. Early factory chocolate could be bland, but as engineers tweaked their processes and improved their recipes, the quality evened out. By 1910, you could count on the same taste whether you were in London or New York. Packaging changed the game too. Hershey introduced foil-wrapped bars in 1907 that held up better in warm weather. Cadbury's cardboard boxes with individual compartments made it easy to buy a whole assortment at once. Suddenly, chocolate could be stacked on shelves, shipped long distances, and pulled out for a quick snack anytime. The impact was everywhere. Factory workers ate chocolate for quick energy. Mothers packed it for their kids. Soldiers carried it in rations during the war. The average British person went from eating barely half a pound of chocolate a year to 5 pounds by 1920. Chocolate wasn't just a treat anymore, it was part of daily life. Advertising finished the job. Companies sold chocolate as wholesome and energizing. Athletes posed with bars in Cadbury ads. Hershey claimed his bars were more nutritious than meat. Chocolate lost its image as an elite luxury and became something you'd see at birthday parties, on movie nights, or tucked in a lunchbox. Factories kept inventing new products: chocolate-covered raisins for theaters, thin bars for vending machines, molded eggs for Easter. Everywhere you looked, chocolate was there, affordable, reliable, and always within reach. Of course, not everything about this new era was sweet. Factory jobs could be repetitive, and the pay wasn't great. But chocolate factory work was still cleaner and safer than many other options. Employees sometimes got free samples, which didn't hurt either. By the 1930s, small chocolate makers had all but disappeared. A handful of companies controlled most of the world's supply. What had once been a rare luxury became a daily comfort, but at hidden costs still to come. If you look a little closer at the chocolate bar in your hand, you'll see more than just a sweet treat. The story behind it is tangled with the lives of people who worked, and sometimes suffered, to make it possible. The early 1900s brought this reality to the surface, as investigative journalists and activists started asking uncomfortable questions about where all that cheap cacao was coming from. In 1908, British journalist Henry Nevinson published his findings on the cacao plantations of São Tomé and Príncipe, islands off the coast of West Africa. His reports described workers facing severe abuses and debt bondage. Many had signed contracts they couldn't read, recruited with promises of decent pay, only to have their papers taken away on arrival. Plantation owners enforced quotas with harsh discipline, and families found themselves trapped by debts that never seemed to shrink. Days were long, food was scarce, and the sense of escape was almost non-existent. Nevinson's exposé landed hard in Britain, especially since much of this cacao supplied Cadbury, a company known for its Quaker values and reputation for fairness. The public response was swift. Women's groups and church organizations organized boycotts of Cadbury products. Newspapers ran headlines about forced labor in chocolate, and consumers began to question what was really behind their favorite sweets. Cadbury denied knowledge at first, but internal investigations confirmed the troubling reports. Even when they found evidence, complex supply chains made it easy for companies to buy cacao through middlemen and avoid accountability. Under mounting pressure, Cadbury made a move. In 1909, they stopped buying cacao from São Tomé and Príncipe, the worst offending islands, but the damage to their reputation lingered, and sales took a hit as people looked at the entire industry with new skepticism. Other companies like Hershey and Nestle also faced scrutiny, though reactions outside Britain were slower and less intense. The reforms that followed were uneven. Cadbury set up plantations in British West Africa with improved conditions, but these produced only a small share of what was needed. Most companies simply shifted their sourcing to other colonial territories where oversight remained weak and exploitation continued. Forced labor, low wages, and child labor didn't disappear. They just became harder to trace as companies built more complex supply networks. As the years passed, the headlines faded, but the core issues persisted. Later decades saw further investigations and new evidence that exploitation was still woven into the global chocolate trade. Each time the cycle repeated: outrage, promises of reform, and then a slow return to business as usual. Still, those early boycotts did something important. They showed that when people cared enough, their choices could push companies to act. Early boycotts taught that mindful choices could shape chocolate's future. So the next time you unwrap a piece of chocolate, you might wonder who else was part of its story. And as history moved forward, chocolate would find itself in a new role, offering comfort in the most unexpected places. If you were a soldier in World War I, your daily ration might include something that wasn't just about survival. The British Army handed out more than 50 million chocolate bars between 1914 and 1918. Commanders noticed what a difference a single bar could make. Sometimes it was the only thing that made trench life bearable for a few minutes. Soldiers saved them for the worst days, traded cigarettes for extra portions, and wrote home asking for more. Chocolate became a small, familiar comfort in a world that made little sense. There was more to it than just taste. Chocolate contains theobromine and a bit of caffeine, enough to give you a gentle lift without the jitters. Even more important, the sweet taste and smooth texture can trigger endorphin release, a chemical mood boost that mattered when you were stuck in mud and barbed wire. The sugar delivered quick energy for night watches. But the psychological effect was what soldiers remembered. Unwrapping a chocolate bar was like opening a tiny window back to peacetime. Birthday parties, holidays, or a sweetheart's gift. Chocolate factories adapted to the realities of war. Hershey developed a trench bar that wouldn't melt in summer or freeze in winter. The taste was nothing to write home about, bitter and waxy, but it could survive months in a kit bag. Officers sometimes got higher quality Swiss chocolate, But for most, any chocolate was better than none. When World War II arrived, chocolate's place in military life only grew. The U.S. Army commissioned a new kind of ration bar with 3 goals. It had to withstand heat, provide quick energy, and offer a morale boost. The result was the D-ration bar, a dense, heat-stable block that packed 600 calories. Troops quickly dubbed it a brick with flavor, and while it wasn't anyone's favorite, it still served its purpose. Soldiers in the Pacific traded for extra bars, and air crews kept them in survival kits. When Allied troops liberated towns, they handed out chocolate to civilians, and for children who hadn't tasted real chocolate in years, it was a sign that better days might be coming. Back home, chocolate became a symbol of connection. Families sent care packages with homemade fudge, hoping their loved ones would find a moment of comfort. Women working long shifts in factories received chocolate rations to keep their energy up. The U.S. government even classified cocoa as essential for morale, keeping it available when other luxuries were scarce. The wars changed chocolate's image. What started as a childhood treat became linked to survival and resilience under pressure. Veterans came home with a taste for the brands they'd relied on overseas, and companies knew it. Hershey's ran ads showing soldiers sharing bars, tying chocolate to ideas of loyalty and home. Science eventually caught up with what soldiers already knew. Chocolate's ingredients trigger the release of endorphins and dopamine, making it a natural mood lifter. In stressful times, cravings for chocolate spike, not just for energy, but for the comfort it brings. Factories learned from wartime demand, speeding up production and inventing new ways to stretch supplies. Chocolate-covered raisins and other treats helped make the most of limited resources. Governments even stockpiled cacao beans, treating them as strategically important as fuel or steel. If you were in a trench or a shelter, you might save your chocolate for a particular moment, a birthday, a letter from home, or just a day when things felt especially bleak. The act of choosing when to eat it offered a rare sense of control. That's why chocolate kept showing up in ration packs long after the wars ended. It wasn't just about calories, it was about morale. From battlefields to Valentine's chocolates, cacao's meaning kept evolving. It's easy to forget that chocolate's reputation as a romantic gesture is a recent twist in its long story. For most of history, chocolate meant ritual, status, or even currency. Definitely not love notes or first dates. That shift from sacred drink to courtship gift started in Victorian England, where social rules made flirting a complicated business. If you were a young man in the 1800s, you couldn't just walk up to someone you liked. Gifting chocolate became a clever workaround. Expensive enough to show you were serious, but not so forward as to spark gossip. Cadbury saw the opportunity, and in 1861 started selling decorated chocolate boxes designed for gifting. These weren't heart-shaped yet, just elegant wooden rectangles lined with satin, but they quickly became the go-to gift for secret admirers. The design encouraged sharing, and the simple act of offering someone a chocolate created a private moment that was still socially acceptable. It didn't take long for the chocolate box to become a staple of Victorian courtship. By the late 1800s, the idea had taken root. Doctors chimed in, claiming chocolate could restore vitality and even spark passion. Medical journals made wild claims about its powers, and pharmacies sold chocolate-coated pills, promising everything from improved mood to marital bliss. Most of these claims were questionable at best, but the idea stuck. Chocolate was now linked with love. Valentine's Day was the perfect stage for this new association. In 1868, Richard Cadbury released the first heart-shaped chocolate box, complete with cupids and flowers painted on the lid. It cost more than a week's wages for most workers, but the boxes sold out anyway. The message was clear. If you wanted to show affection, you reached for chocolate. It was a marketing move that worked so well, it's still with us more than a century later. As the 20th century rolled in, chocolate companies doubled down. Hershey's Kisses, introduced in 1907, were sold as affordable tokens of affection. Ads in the 1920s and 30s leaned hard into the romance angle, showing forgetful husbands grabbing a box of chocolates to make up for missed anniversaries, or sweethearts exchanging bars as proof of devotion. By the time radio dramas and magazine stories joined in, chocolate was firmly established as the treat you gave when you wanted to say, "I care." Science gave marketers a little extra fuel. By the 1970s, studies found that chocolate contained compounds that could mimic the feeling of falling in love. Though, to be fair, you'd have to eat an absurd amount to notice any effect. That didn't stop headlines from calling chocolate an aphrodisiac, and the legend grew. Today, Valentine's Day sees about 70 million pounds of chocolate sold every February in the U.S. alone. Heart-shaped boxes fly off the shelves, even though the actual chocolate inside is often just the leftovers from regular production lines. Most people don't mind. The ritual of giving and sharing chocolate is what matters. The act itself, offering a piece, unwrapping a bar together, creates a little moment of connection that's hard to match with flowers or cards. What's striking is how thoroughly chocolate's old meanings have been replaced. The drink, once used in Mayan ceremonies or traded in Aztec markets, is now a symbol of affection and intimacy. But not everyone is content with the glossy, mass-produced version of romance. Some chocolatiers are pushing for a return to honesty, selling bars that list the origin of the beans, the percentage of cacao, and sometimes even the wages paid to farmers. Fair trade Valentine's chocolates offer a nod back to chocolate's roots, reminding us that every bar has a story that goes far beyond the wrapping. Even as marketing keeps chocolate at the center of romantic rituals, a quiet shift is happening. More people are looking for chocolate that feels special again, not just as a symbol, but as something real, complex, and worthy of attention. It's a small but growing movement, and it's changing what you might expect from your next chocolate bar.
There's a quiet shift happening in the world of chocolate, one that's less about glossy wrappers and more about what's inside the bar. Instead of chasing uniform sweetness, a new generation of chocolate makers is turning back to the old ways: small batches, careful roasting, and an obsession with where the beans come from. They're not just making chocolate, they're restoring it to something closer to its origins. Most chocolate bars from the supermarket are blended for predictability, but these bean-to-bar makers treat cacao like a crop that changes with the weather. Each harvest, each region, even each farm can bring out new notes: citrus, nuts, earth, or something you can't quite name. The goal isn't to erase difference, but to let you taste it. Some makers even print the harvest year on the wrapper, daring you to compare one batch to the next. You won't see the same assembly lines here. Instead, there's hand sorting, slow roasting, and grinding that takes days, not hours. Additives are kept to a minimum. Instead of masking bitterness with heavy alkali processing or vanilla, these makers want you to notice the natural flavors from the bean itself. It's a process that takes patience, and it shows in the final bar. Direct trade and fair trade are more than just buzzwords. Many of these small producers build relationships with the farms where their beans are grown. They pay above market rates, sometimes funding community projects or providing training in fermentation and drying. The payoff is better beans and a supply chain that's actually transparent. It's a far cry from the anonymous bulk buying that defines industrial chocolate.
If you break off a piece of one of these bars, you'll notice something different right away. The texture isn't waxy or greasy. It's smooth, sometimes even creamy, thanks to long, careful conching. Small batch methods help preserve the complex flavors and aromas that mass production often flattens out. The result is a bar that changes as it melts, revealing new notes with every bite. Imagine tasting a hint of grapefruit or roasted hazelnut and knowing that's just the bean, nothing added. For some, this sounds like chocolate snobbery. After all, a craft bar can cost 10 times what a mass market one does. But the appeal is real. More people are looking for something unique, something that stands out from the endless rows of identical sweets. Grocery stores are giving up more shelf space to these new bars, and even the biggest chocolate companies are starting to take notice, launching lines that highlight single origins or ethical sourcing. This movement isn't only about flavor, it's a response to the long history of exploitation in chocolate. By naming the farms and supporting fair wages, these makers are trying to do better by the people who grow the beans. Some even fund school lunches or teach new techniques to help farmers get the most from their crops. The story is right there on the wrapper, making it harder to ignore where your chocolate really comes from. If you've never tried one of these bars, pause for a second and imagine breaking off a piece. Let it melt on your tongue. See if you can taste something beyond just sweet. Maybe it's a flash of orange peel or the sharpness of red fruit. In that moment, you're tasting something ancient. Flavors that once filled royal cups and marked sacred ceremonies. In tasting these ancient flavors, we reconnect with chocolate's first centuries. And as you sit with that, it's worth remembering just how far chocolate has traveled, because today it's more than a ritual or a rare treat. It's become something much bigger, woven into daily life in ways that would have stunned its earliest makers. Step into a grocery store, and you're surrounded by the evidence. Chocolate is everywhere. The global chocolate industry now tops $100 billion, a number so big it's hard to picture. That's more than the GDP of many small countries, all driven by something you can toss in your cart for a couple of bucks. What once was reserved for Mayan kings is now a universal comfort, available at every checkout and in nearly every home. Factories pump out enough chocolate each year to give every person on the planet about 2 pounds. The average American eats 12 pounds a year. In Switzerland, it's nearly 20. Chocolate isn't just a treat, it's a habit, a reward, sometimes almost a reflex. Cocoa stands as the third largest agricultural export from developing countries after coffee and cotton. Ivory Coast alone supplies about 40% of the world's cocoa beans. The scale is industrial. Major companies like Mars and Nestle process over 1 million tons of cocoa each year, and most of it is destined for mass-market bars, candies, and cookies. Chocolate has slipped into every corner of daily life. It's a staple for holidays, Valentine's Day, Easter, Christmas, wrapped in foil, shaped like hearts or bunnies or hidden in plastic eggs. Fundraisers use it to support schools. Kids unwrap chocolate coins at Hanukkah. Tourists line up at factory museums in Hershey, Pennsylvania, or Cadbury World in England, eager
for a taste and a peek behind the scenes. Chocolate isn't just food, it's ritual, nostalgia, and sometimes even a little bit of magic.
How did we get here? Industrialization made chocolate cheap and abundant. Machines and mass production cut costs, turning what was once a luxury into something anyone could afford. Marketing did the rest. Early ads pitched chocolate as healthy, good for your bones, your nerves, your mood. Later it became the language of romance, the go-to gift for apologies and anniversaries. Eventually, chocolate was sold as a comfort, a reward at the end of a long day, or a small way to show you care. These messages worked because they tapped into something deeper, the emotional pull that chocolate seems to have on almost everyone. The numbers tell the story, but so do the habits. When incomes rise in new markets, chocolate sales jump. Even in tough times, people keep buying it, maybe trading down to cheaper bars, but rarely giving it up. During recessions, premium chocolate sales dip, but basic chocolate bars keep moving. The craving for comfort doesn't go away. Of course, all this comes with a cost. Most cocoa farmers live on less than $1 a day. Child labor and environmental damage are still widespread, especially in West Africa. The industry moves slowly on these problems, and fair trade chocolate still makes up a small fraction of total sales. There's a growing push for transparency and better practices, but the system remains complicated. Yet the appeal endures. Chocolate isn't just a snack, it's a connection, a little moment of pleasure, a way to mark time or share something sweet. From sacred potion to global comfort, cacao still holds its ancient magic in every bite. So, as you settle in tonight and maybe reach for a square of chocolate yourself, think about the journey behind it. The story isn't finished.
Across centuries and continents, chocolate has traveled a winding path, from a bitter ceremonial drink to an everyday comfort, from sacred rituals to heart-shaped gifts, from handmade delicacies to mass-produced bars in every corner store. Each step along the way solved a problem or answered a craving, turning something wild and unfamiliar into a source of sweetness, connection, and even solace. So next time you take a bite, consider the journey behind it, the ancient hands that first tended cacao, the inventors who tamed its bitterness, the workers who keep it moving through the world. May your dreams be as sweet as that first taste of chocolate.